Chapter 1. The Day the Country Said Sorry. James Turner had never imagined he would live long enough to hear a president speak his name, or the names of men like him, in a room so bright and polished it felt unreal. The White House shone with a kind of stillness he had never felt before, a stillness that pressed against his skin like a second presence. He sat quietly in the front row, his hands folded loosely in his lap, his posture straight, only because Isaac had guided him into the chair that morning with a firmness James could feel, even if he could no longer see. There were cameras, he could hear them. The quiet clicks scattered across the room like insects darting along the walls. Someone whispered instructions to another person across the aisle. Shoes shifted, a throat cleared. The room was crowded, yet it carried a hush so thick it seemed that everyone there understood this was not a celebration. It was a reckoning. James's sight had faded to shadows years earlier, but he did not need eyes to sense the weight of the moment. The breath of the people around him felt tight, careful. The past hung over the room like a damp sheet, pressing down on every shoulder. He felt Isaac's arm brush lightly against his, the soft reassurance of a son who would become both anchor and guide. Isaac was grown now, a man with his own life and burdens. Yet here he stood, steady and silent, as though shielding his father from every harsh memory pressing forward to be remembered. A woman began to introduce the president. Her voice was smooth and rehearsed, but beneath the practiced cadence was something James had come to recognize over the years: fear. Not for herself, but for what this day represented. Fear of a wound being opened in front of the world. Fear of history revealing just how deep it ran. "Today," she said, "we gather to acknowledge a grave injustice that lasted far too long. An injustice committed against the men of Macon County, Alabama, and their families." James swallowed slowly. The words were clear, but they felt distant, as though spoken underwater. His heart moved differently, not faster, just heavier. He heard the shuffle of feet as the president stepped forward. The room shifted with him, even before he spoke. That was the kind of presence power carried. Isaac leaned close so his father would know the moment had begun. "Daddy, he's standing now," Isaac whispered. James nodded. He kept his face forward, though the world before him was nothing but a soft wash of white and shadow. The president began. His voice carried none of the smoothness James expected. It carried sorrow and shame. Those two feelings were enough to make the room go still. "What the United States government did," the president said slowly, "was deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. It was shameful. It was racist. It was a betrayal of the most basic human trust." The words drifted outward. They seemed to settle on everyone, not just the men who had come to witness this moment. A few sniffles broke the silence. Someone exhaled sharply. A chair creaked. James sat motionless. He did not smile. He did not nod. He did not let relief wash over him, because today was not a day for relief. It was a day for ghosts. "For 40 years, the president continued, the government allowed a study to continue in which treatment was withheld from hundreds of black men. These men were told they had bad blood. They were told they were receiving help. They were promised care and compassion. Instead, they were given deceit." Bad blood. That phrase struck James hard, even now. He had grown up hearing it in Macon County, long before the men in the white coats came into town. When someone felt faint, folks called it bad blood. When a man collapsed in the fields, they said it was bad blood. It was a phrase with no boundary, stretching across illnesses people had no names for. It slipped easily into conversation because it belonged to their world. They never imagined it could be used against them. James pressed his hands together, feeling the skin along his knuckles tremble. He thought of his mother, who used to whisper prayers over swollen joints and fevers she could not treat. He thought of the day he first stood in line behind his neighbors, believing the government doctors had come to offer something rare: help. Real help. Help for families like his who had lived without doctors, without medicines, without the kind of care others took for granted. He had trusted them. That trust had cost more than he ever understood at the time. The president paused, letting the silence do the work. When he spoke again, his voice lowered, as if speaking directly to the men seated before him. To the survivors who are here today, to the families who carry the scars of this atrocity, to the communities who bore this burden, we are here to say, on behalf of the American people, we are sorry. Sorry. A simple word, a small word, yet it slipped into James's chest and twisted there. For your suffering, for the pain inflicted upon your wives and children, for the trust that was broken, for the health that was taken, for the truth hidden from you, for the precious years stolen. James drew a breath that felt older than his bones. The chairs beside him shifted as several survivors bowed their heads. James could almost feel their sorrow rise in the air like heat from the Alabama sun. These were his brothers, whether by blood or by suffering. Men who, like him, had walked willingly into the hands of government doctors because they believed it was the right thing to do for their families. He had believed it because Nurse Whitford believed it. She had stood there with her reassuring smile and her gentle voice, saying this care was meant for them, that it was safe, that these doctors knew what they were doing. She had said the words with such confidence that even the most skeptical among them found comfort in her presence. He wondered, as he often did, if she had known the whole truth then, or if she too had been walking blind into something far darker. The president's voice grew steady. We cannot undo what was done, but we can honor your courage. We can acknowledge the truth, and we can vow that such an abuse of trust will never again take place in this country. James sat still, his jaw tightened. His eyes, though sightless, shifted toward the direction of the voice. There was a moment in which the president began listing the numbers, the hard, cold arithmetic of suffering. The number of men infected, the number of men kept untreated, the number of wives who were unknowingly exposed, the number of children who entered the world already burdened by a disease no one warned their parents about. It was when the number of wives was spoken that James felt his throat close. Sarah. He heard her name rise in his memory like a song half forgotten. He felt the warmth of her fingers against his palm. He heard her humming in the kitchen, the rhythm light and sweet. He saw her smile the way he once could, and he felt her fade, slowly, painfully, as the years passed. She had been one of the forgotten, one of those wives, the ones the government never counted properly. Isaac leaned in close. James felt his son's arm brush his. There was no need for words. Isaac understood. He had always understood. The president continued speaking, offering promises for the future, outlining funds for a bioethics center at Tuskegee, acknowledging the deep mistrust the study had sown into the fabric of black communities. Each sentence layered another weight on the room, yet none of it could unmake the past. When the applause finally came, it was soft, respectful, heavy with grief. James did not clap. He simply sat there, letting the moment settle. Isaac touched his arm. "Daddy," he whispered, "they want us to stand." James rose slowly. His legs trembled, but Isaac's steady grip kept him upright. The room shifted around him as others stood too. Someone guided his hand so he knew where to face. The president stepped forward, offering a handshake. James could not see the president's face, but he felt the man's hands. They were warm, firm, carrying the weight of everything that had been said. "Thank you for being here," the president murmured. James nodded slightly. He wanted to speak, but words caught in his throat. At last, he managed a quiet whisper. "Thank you for telling the truth." It was all he could offer. And perhaps, for today, it was enough. Isaac guided him back into his seat as the ceremony moved forward. The room felt lighter now, though not softer. The truth had been named aloud, and truth carried its own kind of air. It did not heal, but it breathed. James tilted his face upward slightly, sensing the light beyond the blur of his vision. Somewhere in that brightness, he imagined Sarah's voice. "You and me, together forever." He closed his eyes, letting her words settle over him like a warm blanket. The ceremony continued, but James heard none of it. This was not the beginning of healing. It was the naming of pain. and naming was the first step toward remembering properly. For the first time in a long while, he felt the past shifting inside him, opening space for remembrance without fear. The truth had been spoken. The silence was broken. And though his eyes could no longer see the world, he felt something he had not felt in decades: light. Chapter 2. The Ceremony of Reckoning. Before the world grew complicated, before men in white coats began visiting Macon County with questions he did not yet understand, James's life was shaped by the land. Every morning of his boyhood began the same way: the sound of his father's boots striking the hard-packed dirt outside the cabin, the scent of pine and sap drifting through the thin wood walls, the low whistle his father carried in his chest as naturally as breath. The woods were their home, their work, and their inheritance. James was small when he first followed his father to the yard where the felled trees were cut, stripped, and hauled to the mill. He remembered the weight of the air, always thick with sawdust, the shimmer of heat rising off the wide Alabama earth. His father, Elijah Turner, was a pulpwooder by trade, and there was no softness in the work. It demanded strength, endurance, and a stubborn kind of hope that tomorrow would bring more than today. Elijah rarely spoke while he worked. His silence was not harsh, only steady. He believed a man learned more by watching than by talking. James learned how to steady his footing on uneven ground, how to judge the direction a tree would fall, how to lift with his legs, and how to breathe through pain without letting it slow him. Elijah would glance over occasionally, nodding once in approval if James kept up. That was praise in their household, silent but real. James's mother, Lily May, believed learning should come from more than the woods. She kept 5 children fed, clothed, and guided without ever raising her voice. She braided her daughter's hair before dawn, prayed over her sons at night, and used every scrap of time she could find to teach James how to read. Their house was small, but her devotion made it feel full. She kept a worn Bible on the table by the window. Its pages were soft from use, corners bent, passages underlined in pencil. It was the first book James ever learned to read. She ran her finger along the lines, sounding out each word slowly until the letters made sense. She had only gone to school for a few years herself before being pulled out to work, but she believed fiercely that knowledge mattered. She believed it protected a person. She believed her eldest son should have more than she did. Elijah did not agree. He loved his children, but he lived in a world that told him education was a luxury poor folks could not afford. What mattered was work, providing, survival. He had been raised that way, and he passed it down without considering whether another path existed. School was not mandatory for black children in rural Alabama, not in any meaningful way. Attendance records could be bent. Work hours never could. When James turned 13, Elijah took him from the schoolhouse entirely. "He is ready," Elijah said. "The woods will make a man out of him." Lily May had argued gently but firmly. She had pleaded for another year, even another season. Elijah shook his head. The family needed the income. The mill paid by the load. A boy who could lift and haul was worth more than a child who knew numbers on a page. James remembered his mother's face that night, the way she had smoothed his hair back and whispered, "Do not let the world make you small. There is more in you, James, more than your father sees." He carried those words for years. The older he grew, the more he saw how deeply his parents loved him, yet how differently they understood the meaning of love. Elijah believed in protection through work. Lily May believed in protection through knowledge. Their 2 kinds of love met inside James like 2 streams touching, blending into something that shaped the man he would become. Sunday mornings, the family walked the dusty road to Shiloh Baptist Church. The building was small, its white paint faded from the sun, but it held a power James could feel as soon as he stepped through the doorway. The sanctuary was filled with voices that rose and fell like waves. Hands clapped, feet tapped. The old wooden floor trembled beneath the weight of song. Reverend Carter preached with a voice that reached every corner of the room. He spoke of burdens, of hope, of endurance, of a God who saw every suffering and every quiet triumph. He spoke of the dignity of labor and the promise of better days. Most of all, he spoke of community, how no man was meant to stand alone. When James looked around, he saw his neighbors, men who smelled of sweat and pine, women with strong hands and tired eyes, families who lived their lives like his family lived theirs, poor but proud, worn but unbroken. They were tied together by the land, the church, and a silent understanding that suffering shared was suffering halved. After service, the congregation lingered outside beneath the shade of the oaks. The women shared news of births and illnesses. The men talked about weather, wages, and the unpredictable behavior of bosses at the mill. Children chased each other across the grass, laughing freely in ways grown folks rarely could. It was in those moments that James felt the tightness in his chest loosen. He saw how faith stitched people together, how it gave them breath on days when everything felt too heavy, how it carried families through sickness and storms. He learned that community meant survival. When James turned 15, he overheard his parents talking late one night. Their whispers drifted through the thin wall of the bedroom he shared with his brothers. Lily May's voice was soft but strained. "He is working too hard, Elijah. Look at his hands. They ain't a boy's hands no more. We took his schooling before he had time to finish learning." "He is learning plenty," Elijah replied. "A man learns what he needs in the woods, same as I did, same as my daddy before me." "He had a teacher, Elijah. He could read. He liked it. God gave that boy a mind meant for more." "Eliza, what good is a mind when there is no money to put food on the table?" "School don't feed children, work does." James lay there in the dark, his chest tightening. He listened to the argument unfold like a slow storm. He heard the tremble in his mother's voice when she said she wanted something better for him. He heard the frustration in his father's voice when he insisted that better was a dream folks like them could not afford. For the first time in his life, James understood that his future was not just something he wanted, it was something they were fighting over. And yet, the next morning, he rose with the sun and followed his father into the yard without question. There was no rebellion in him, only acceptance. Responsibility had been placed in his hands, and he would bear it the way he bore every other weight. Still, he never forgot his mother's words, "Do not let the world make you small." Years later, he would remember those words again. He would remember them on the day the government doctors came into town. He would remember how they spoke with certainty, how they promised protection, how they used words like treatment and care and help. He would remember how those words sounded just like hope. And he would remember the lessons he learned as a boy, lessons about trust, about community, about the dignity of labor, about the price of faith. Everything that had shaped him began here, in the red earth of Macon County, in the woods that taught him strength, in a home where love was quiet but fierce, in the church that held them all together. He could not have known it then, but these early roots would one day become the soil from which both his greatest faith and his deepest betrayal would grow. Chapter 3. The Weight of Home. James learned early that childhood in Macon County was not something you held on to. It was something you passed through on your way to work. By the time he was 12, he carried responsibilities that would have buckled boys in other places. Here, they were simply expected. Evenings after the pulpwood yard were never restful. When Elijah brought the wagon back at dusk, James hopped down before the wheel stopped turning. His body ached, his clothes were streaked with sap and dust, and his fingers throbbed from gripping the saw. But he knew the rhythm of home offered no room for slowing. Behind the house, the chickens waited to be fed. The barrel needed water brought from the pump. Firewood had to be stacked. His younger siblings needed help with their chores, or their baths, or their lessons. The day did not end when the work whistle blew. It ended when the house finally settled into quiet. Lily May supervised everything from the small kitchen, moving with a grace that made even exhaustion look like a kind of prayer. The scent of cornbread or stewed beans drifted through the house, calling everyone toward the table long before the meal was ready. James loved that smell. It carried comfort, it carried memory, it carried a sense of belonging that nothing outside their home could match. When James entered from work each night, his siblings rushed to him as if he had returned from a journey across oceans instead of a long day in the woods. "James, look what I drew," his sister Elsie would say, holding up a scrap of paper covered in crooked flowers. "James, help me with my sums," little Harold begged, sliding into his lap before he could wash his hands. "James, Mama says I can be the one to gather eggs tomorrow," Ruthie whispered with pride. Their voices tumbled together, a chorus of childhood he barely remembered as his own. They saw him as both brother and hero, someone who stood between them and the harsher parts of the world outside. Lily May always smiled softly when she saw them clinging to him. "He is home now," she would say. "Let him rest a moment." But even she knew moments of rest were short-lived. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, James noticed how thin his mother's face looked in the lamplight. Her eyes carried shadows that did not belong to the flickering flame. She moved carefully, pressing one hand against her lower back. "You all right, Mama?" James asked quietly as he took his seat. Lily May straightened immediately, offering a smile too quick to be real. "I am fine, baby. Just tired is all." But the tremor in her fingers told a different story. He had overheard the adults whisper once about a baby she lost years before he was old enough to understand. A miscarriage, they called it. He remembered the hush in the house, the way his mother stayed in bed for days, the way Elijah sat outside on the porch long after the sun had set, his elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed with a grief he never named aloud. James had been too young then to understand loss, but he understood it now. He understood the way his mother's eyes sometimes drifted toward an empty corner, as though remembering a child who never had the chance to run across the floor. Sometimes she would smooth the tablecloth absent-mindedly, her lips pressed together in a way that spoke of a wound time could soften, but not erase. Thinking about the child she had lost made James wonder what kind of brother or sister he might have had. Someone older than the little ones, someone to help in the yard, someone to share the weight of work, someone who might have carried part of the load that now sat entirely on his shoulders. He looked at his mother now, her back straight despite the ache he sensed beneath her ribs. She served each child before herself, placing cornbread and greens on their plates with a tenderness he could feel even from across the table. "Let's pray," Elijah said, lowering his head. The family joined hands. James held Ruthie's tiny palm in one hand and his mother's warm fingers in the other. Her thumb brushed against his knuckle, soft and steady. A silent reassurance, a reminder that, though the world demanded much from them, they still had each other. Elijah's prayers were always the same. He thanked God for strength to work, for hands capable of labor, for food on the table, for the health of his wife and children. He asked for guidance, humility, and the endurance to face whatever came next. When he finished, everyone murmured amen and began to eat. Tonight felt different. The air was heavy, the room quieter than usual. Even the little ones sensed the shift. They chewed quietly, their eyes flicking between parents who seemed locked in thoughts too deep to share. James watched his mother. Her smile was gentle when Elsie spilled water and when Harold asked for a second piece of cornbread. But when her eyes settled on Elijah, the softness faded, replaced by a tired concern. After dinner, while the children washed dishes and swept the floor, James stepped outside with Elijah to bring in the last of the firewood. The evening air was cool, and the sky streaked with fading purple light. "Daddy," James began, adjusting the weight of the logs in his arms, "Mama seems tired lately." Elijah let out a long breath. "She works hard, same as everyone." "She works harder than all of us," James said. His father stopped walking. For a moment, the only sound was the chirping of crickets and the distant low of a cow from a neighboring farm. "You worry too much," Elijah said. "No, sir," James replied. "I worry just enough." There was a pause. James could feel it stretching between them, thick like unspoken truth. Elijah turned toward him. In the fading light, his father's face was unreadable. "There are things a man can change," Elijah finally said, "and things he cannot. Your mama carries her pain quiet, always has. But she is strong, stronger than most." James nodded slowly. It was true. Strength and suffering often walked hand in hand in the Turner household. Still, tonight, the weight of the past seemed to press harder than usual. As they finished stacking the firewood, James's chest tightened with a thought he had never spoken aloud. What if Mama had lived a different life? What if she had kept going to school? What if that lost baby had lived? What if the world had been kinder? He wondered, too, what kind of life he might have had if Elijah had allowed him to stay in school, if he had learned more, if he had become something other than a boy who could swing an axe and haul timber until his muscles burned. Would life have been easier, better, different? He pushed the thoughts away. In Macon County, questions like that did not lead anywhere. You did the work that needed doing. You lived the life that was handed to you. You carried your family. That was all. Inside, Lily Mae hummed a soft tune while the children finished their chores. Her voice carried through the open window, filling the yard with warmth. James closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle inside him. That hum had comforted him most of his life. It was a thread connecting the past to the present, stitching their family together through every hardship. Later that night, when the younger children were asleep and the house had grown quiet, James sat on the edge of his bed and looked toward the shadow of the doorway where his parents continued to whisper. Their voices rose and fell in a familiar pattern, the same arguments about his future, his education, and the weight he already carried. He could not hear the words clearly, but he knew the meaning. He felt the pull of two worlds again, the world his father trusted and the world his mother dreamed of. He wondered which world would eventually claim him. It was in that fragile space between chores and sleep, between boyhood and manhood, between responsibility and longing, that James felt something shift within him. A quiet knowledge that life was bigger than the fields and the mill and the cabin walls. He did not have words for it yet, but the feeling made his chest ache. Years later, when the government doctors began visiting Macon County, bringing promises that sounded like blessings wrapped in science, James would think back to this moment. He would remember how desperately he had wanted something more. More for himself, more for his parents, more for the family he hoped to build one day. He would remember that yearning, and he would understand exactly why hope had been so easy to believe. Chapter 4. Lessons Carried in Silence. By the time James reached 16, he had grown into the kind of young man people noticed when he walked into a room. Not because he spoke loudly or demanded attention, he did neither. But there was something in his posture, in the steadiness of his hands, in the quiet way he listened when others talked. It was a presence shaped by years of responsibility and the kind of work that carved strength into a person's bones. The woods had hardened his muscles, but it was his household that molded his spirit. He had learned to mend things when they broke, to soothe his younger siblings when fear crept into their voices, to read the tension in his parents' faces before any said a word. These skills were not taught but absorbed. They sank into him like rain into thirsty soil. The Turner house stood on a small rise between two fields. The land around it stretched wide and open, dotted with pines, wild grass, and the occasional stubborn oak that refused to lean despite years of wind. The sunrise spilled across the yard each morning in a steady wave of gold. At dusk, the horizon glowed a deep red that made the entire world look as though it breathed. James loved the land. He loved how alive it felt, how honest. Trees did not lie. The soil did not deceive. Storms were never unexpected if you learned to read the sky. Nature revealed its intentions if you paid attention. People were different. People hid things. People spoke in half-truths. People made promises they did not always intend to keep. He learned that lesson slowly, mostly from overhearing grown folks' conversations outside the church on Sunday mornings. Some men spoke bitterly about the boss at the mill who promised higher pay but never delivered. Others complained of white store owners in town who extended credit with a smile but collected payment with a sneer. A few whispered about the white doctors who came through the county now and then, offering checkups but leaving folks feeling uneasy. Doctors talk fast, one man whispered once, too fast, like they want you to hear everything except the truth. James remembered the way the older men nodded at that comment, murmuring approval. Distrust of the medical world ran deep in Macon County. Many families had lost loved ones not because of illness, but because help came too late or not at all. Hospitals were far away. Treatment cost more than any farmer or mill worker could afford. Black patients were often turned away, or treated last, or treated poorly. Stories like that were not rare. They were common enough to become warnings passed down through generations. James absorbed all these truths long before he ever stepped inside a clinic. They settled into him quietly, becoming part of his understanding of the world. Trust was not given easily. Hope had to be earned. Promises needed proof. Yet in his own home, he saw a different kind of truth. He saw love that endured without explanation. He saw sacrifice made quietly without reward. He saw how his mother folded strength into every small gesture. One afternoon, after hauling timber since sunrise, James came home to find Lily Mae seated at the table with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her gaze was tired, fixed on something far in the distance. The younger children were outside chasing each other in the yard, their laughter ringing through the open window. "Mama?" James said softly as he stepped inside. She blinked and turned toward him, forcing a smile. "I am all right, baby." But he knew she was not. Her face carried a gray sadness that felt older than she was. He sat across from her, elbows resting gently on the table. "You look tired," he said. She lifted one shoulder slightly. "A mother's tiredness is different, James. It is not something to worry over." "Everything that touches you touches me, Mama," he replied. Her eyes softened. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You carry too much of this house on your back," she whispered. "You are young. You are supposed to be running with your friends, not working yourself down before you have lived." James lowered his gaze. "I want to help," he said. "I want to make things easier." "You already do," she replied, "more than you know." They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind of silence that held understanding rather than distance. Then she added something she had never said outright before. "I lost a child once," she whispered, "before Ruthie was born." James nodded. "I remember," he said. "I never stop thinking about that baby," she continued, her voice trembling. "I wonder if it would have been a boy or a girl. I wonder if they would have been quiet like you or full of mischief like Harold. I wonder if they would have softened your father's stern ways or made him smile more." She paused, looking down at her hands. "Sometimes I wonder if that child would have eased the weight you carry." James felt a slow ache bloom in his chest. His mother rarely spoke of the child she lost, not because she had forgotten, but because the pain lingered just beneath the surface. He wished he could take that sorrow from her, hold it himself so she did not have to. "You never had to carry any weight alone," he said, "not while I am here." Her eyes filled with warmth. "And that is why my heart worries for you," she whispered. Before James could respond, Elijah stepped into the doorway, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Y'all ready for supper?" Elijah asked, glancing between them. James nodded, standing. Lily Mae rose slowly, smoothing her dress as if she could erase the emotion that had pressed against her moments earlier. The family gathered around the table again. They bowed their heads. Elijah prayed. The children passed dishes back and forth. It was a familiar scene, one that stitched their lives together day after day. After dinner, as the younger children washed dishes, James stepped outside to fetch water from the pump. Elijah joined him, walking with the heavy, purposeful stride of a man whose life had been shaped by work. "You been talking to your mama?" Elijah said. "Yes, sir." "She worries," Elijah muttered. "That is her way." James hesitated. "She worries because she cares," he said. Elijah grunted. "I care too," he replied. "But caring cannot change how life works." James thought about that, about the difference between love spoken and love lived. "Maybe," he said softly, "but it can change how we live it." Elijah paused, lifting a bucket to the pump. He said nothing. Yet something flickered in his eyes, something he did not reveal often. A quiet recognition that his son was becoming a man who thought deeply, perhaps more deeply than he had himself. When they re-entered the house, Lily Mae was humming again, her voice soft and steady. James wondered how many times she had sung through her own pain, offering comfort to those around her while carrying an ache of her own. He lay awake that night long after the house had grown silent. Thoughts of his mother's lost child drifted through his mind. He wondered if a sibling would have changed the shape of his life, if he would have had someone to share the weight, someone who might have walked beside him into the unknown future that was slowly building. Yet, even without that missing sibling, James knew he was not alone. He had a family. He had a mother who saw greatness in him. He had siblings who loved him. He had a community that lifted itself through faith and fellowship. Still, sometimes, when the moonlight filtered through the cracks in the wall and cast faint shadows across the room, he felt a quiet longing for something he could not name. A longing for a world where life did not demand so much so early. A world where dreams had enough room to breathe. He did not know then that the yearning inside him would one day shape the choices that changed his life forever. Choices he would make out of hope. Choices he would make out of trust. Choices he would make believing he was doing right. Choices he would come to regret. But that lay far ahead. For now, he was simply a young man growing into himself, shaped by land, by labor, by love, and by lessons carried in silence. Chapter 5. The Weight of Growing Up. By 17, James had grown taller than his father, his shoulders wide and solid from years of lifting timber and hauling logs. His hands, once small and soft, were now lined with calluses that mapped every season he had worked beside Elijah in the woods. He had the body of a man, but inside he still felt like two people at once. A boy who loved simple joys and a young man carrying a weight that pushed him further from childhood each day. The woods had become familiar, almost comforting. He knew the sound of a tree groaning before it fell. He knew the whispering shift of leaves that meant rain was coming. He knew how to read the land with the same instinct other boys his age read books. Every morning he rose before the sun, the sky still dark and quiet, and followed Elijah down the worn dirt path toward the yard. Elijah rarely spoke on the walk there. James used those moments to study his father's silhouette, memorizing the way his shoulders never drooped, even when he was tired. There was something dignified in the way Elijah moved through the world. He carried his burdens with a kind of stubborn grace, refusing to let hardship bend him. One humid morning in late summer, when the fog still hung low across the ground like a faded blanket, Elijah stopped in the middle of the path. James nearly walked into him. "Hold up a minute," Elijah said, turning to face him. James paused, wiping sweat from his forehead, even though the day had not yet begun. "You've been doing good work," Elijah said. His voice was steady, but there was something softer beneath it. Real good work. Praise from his father was rare. A single sentence like that felt like an entire conversation. "Thank you, sir," James answered quietly. "I know it is hard," Elijah continued. "Harder than most folks realize. But you do not complain. You do what needs doing." He paused, searching for something else he had not yet said. "Reminds me of my own daddy." James felt a warmth spread through him. He nodded, unsure how to respond. His father cleared his throat. "You are becoming a man, James. A good one." They stood there in the gray light, father and son, neither speaking further. The acknowledgement hung between them like something sacred. When they resumed walking, the world felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. Later that day, after hours of cutting and stacking timber, the yard boss approached Elijah and James with a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. "Turner," he called out, "the younger one." James stepped forward. "Strong back, good hands," the boss said, eyeing him up and down. "Could use you on the heavier loads next week." Elijah's jaw tightened. "He is still a boy." James straightened. "I can do it," he said. He did not say it to impress the boss. He said it because something inside him wanted the chance to prove he could stand shoulder to shoulder with grown men, to show his father that the work had not broken him. The boss nodded and made a note on his clipboard before walking away. Elijah did not speak for several minutes. When he finally did, his voice carried a mix of pride and worry. "You keep taking on work like this, and you will wear out before you have a chance to live." James looked over at him. "I am fine, Daddy." "You say that because you do not know the years waiting ahead," Elijah replied. The work never stops, James. It never lets up. James did not answer. Part of him believed he was strong enough to carry whatever came. Another part wondered if his father was warning him of more than physical exhaustion. That evening, when they returned home, Lily Mae was already cooking supper. The kitchen smelled of onions sizzling in the pan. James's siblings were doing chores while humming a church tune off-key. The sound made him smile. "You two wash up," Lily Mae said, without turning from the stove. "Supper is almost done." James went to the basin, splashing his face with cool water. When he glanced at the reflection in the small hand mirror, he hardly recognized himself. His jaw was sharper than it had been the year before. His eyes looked older, more serious. He realized suddenly that he was no longer a boy standing in his father's shadow. He was a young man stepping into his own. That night, after supper, Elijah stepped outside with James to smoke his pipe. The sky was scattered with stars, the kind that shone bright out in the countryside, where darkness still tasted like night, not electricity. "You know," Elijah began, blowing out a long plume of smoke, "I used to think life was just work and sleep, then work some more. I figured that was enough for a man." James listened quietly. "But your mama showed me there is more to life than the sweat you put in a day," Elijah continued. "She showed me that a man needs something worth working for." James waited, sensing something important was coming. "I want that for you too," Elijah said. "Something more than these woods." James looked down at his hands. The calluses looked older than he was. "I do not know what else there is," James admitted. "This is all I have ever known." His father looked at him with something like sadness. "That is the problem," Elijah said softly. They fell silent, the night full of crickets and the slow whisper of wind through the trees. James stared at the stars, feeling for the first time that the world beyond Macon County might hold something else he had not yet imagined. Later that week, while helping his mother fold laundry, James asked her a question he had never said aloud. "Mama," he began, hesitating as he shook out a sheet, "did you ever dream of something different?" Lily Mae glanced at him, her eyes warm with recognition. "Dreams do not die just because life pushes them aside," she said. "I used to dream of being a school teacher." "You would have been a good one," James said. She smiled gently. "I wanted to teach children to read with joy, not necessity," she said. "To show them the world was bigger than the land they were born on." James folded the sheet slowly. "Do you still dream that?" he asked. "I dream it for you," she replied. He felt the truth of that settle inside him. Heavy, beautiful, unsettling. That Sunday at Shiloh Baptist, something shifted in James. As the choir sang and Reverend Carter preached, James felt as if his entire life stood at a crossroads he could not yet see. The sermon was about calling, about listening for the quiet voice that guided a person through uncertainty. James felt something stir inside him, a low ache of possibility, a longing for more, a belief that his life might stretch beyond the woods, beyond the routines carved into his days. He could not name the change, but he felt it. Felt it as he shook hands with neighbors after church. Felt it as he watched children play beneath the oak trees. Felt it as his parents laughed quietly with friends near the steps. For the first time, James wondered if he was meant for something that did not yet exist in his world. He had no way of knowing then that this yearning, this open space inside him, would make him vulnerable to the promises of strangers, to the soft-spoken assurances of visiting doctors, to the trust placed in those who wore white coats and carried clipboards. But that future still lay ahead. For now, James stood on the edge of young manhood, shaped by the land, by family, by the ache of dreams not yet spoken. And somewhere deep within him, a quiet voice whispered that life would not always what it had been. Chapter 6. Sarah's Girlhood. Sarah Whitlow grew up in a small white house that sat just beyond the bend in the road that led to Shiloh Baptist Church. It was not a grand home or a poor one, but something steady in between, the kind of place that held itself together through hard work, prayer, and the careful tending of the people who lived inside it. Her mother kept flowers along the front steps, soft blue morning glories that curled around the railing and opened wide each sunrise. Her father kept the yard swept clean, dragging a branch broom across the dirt until it lay smooth as a table. The house had a way of looking prepared, as if expecting company at any moment. Inside that little house, Sarah learned her sense of the world. Her mother, Ada Whitlow, was gentle but firm, a woman who sang while she cooked and prayed with her eyes open, as if watching God move through the room. Her father, Robert, was quieter. He was a deacon at Shiloh, a man who believed in order and pride, who ironed his shirts with the same seriousness he used to read Scripture. Both of them loved their daughter fiercely. But even from a young age, Sarah carried something delicate in her. Not weakness, not fear, but a certain softness around the edges that made her move a little slower, speak a little softer, and keep her gaze lowered more often than not. People in the community said she was shy. Some said she was slow. Others said she was too quiet for her own good. But her mother rejected every label. "She listens before she speaks," Ada would say whenever anyone questioned the way Sarah hung back. More people in this world ought to do the same. Sarah did listen, to everything. She listened to the wind pushing through the trees behind their house. She listened to the way her father's footsteps changed when he was tired. She listened to the laughter of her cousins when they visited on Sundays. She listened to the things people said when they thought she was not paying attention. And she listened to silence. Silence had weight. Silence could speak louder than words. She learned this one afternoon when she was 7, though she never told anyone the details. It was not an event with shouting or violence. It was not something she could even have explained then. But there was a moment, just long enough to change her in ways she would only understand later, when one of her uncles brushed too close behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder just long enough to make her freeze. The smile he gave her felt wrong, like a shadow in the wrong place on a sunny day. Her mother came into the room at that exact moment, her eyes sharp as glass, and she called Sarah to her side with a voice that left no room for argument. Nothing more happened. Nothing else needed to. After that day, Sarah stayed close to her mother in crowded rooms. She kept her distance from certain people. She learned to read eyes and expressions, learned to protect her own quietness, learned to hold herself still like a small animal watching something it did not trust. She did not understand the moment fully until she was older, but she felt it in her bones. People thought she was shy because her spirit was small, but she was shy because her instincts were sharp, and because she knew very early what kind of world she lived in. Her father never knew the reason behind her quietness. Her mother did, though she never spoke of it again. She simply watched Sarah closely for a while afterward, offering a steady presence, a hand on her back in crowded places, a soft hum in the kitchen when Sarah came in to help with the cooking. Little by little, Sarah grew taller. Her limbs lengthened. Her face took shape in a way that made her mother remark that she would be a beauty before long. But that softness remained. She always walked as if listening, as if the world around her might reveal something at any moment, good or bad. School did not come easily at first. The teacher at the small church school near their home had little patience for children who needed more time to catch on. Sarah struggled to keep up with the reading pace, stumbled over arithmetic, and hesitated to speak out loud when called upon. More than once, the teacher sighed and reminded her to use her voice. More than once, her classmates whispered about how slow she was. But when Sarah turned 8, everything changed. A new opportunity opened when the Rosenwald School was built not far from Shiloh. It was a bright, clean structure with large windows and long benches and teachers who expected the children to learn, not simply be watched. Her father wanted her to attend, despite the extra walk, because he believed education mattered, even for girls. Her mother agreed. Let her mind open in a place meant for it, Ada said. And so Sarah started fresh. On her first day, she stood timidly at the edge of a cluster of children, holding her book against her chest. She felt the familiar nervous flutter in her stomach. But the Rosenwald teacher, Miss Lila Carter, had a different way of seeing children. She crouched to meet Sarah's eyes and introduced herself gently, as if Sarah were someone she was honored to teach. "Do you like stories?" Miss Carter asked. Sarah nodded. "Then you will love it here." The kindness in her voice was enough to unravel much of the fear that clung to Sarah's spine. And it turned out that she did love school. She learned to read smoothly. She memorized poems. She practiced penmanship until her lines were almost perfect. She found that knowledge brought a kind of light into her mind, widening spaces she did not know existed. But the place where she bloomed most was the choir. Shiloh Baptist had always been the center of her world, a place where her parents stood side by side on Sundays, where sermons rose like storms and settled into peace. One Wednesday evening during choir practice, the music director asked if any of the children wanted to sing a verse alone. Sarah sat still, of course, with her hands folded in her lap. Then someone nudged her gently. It was her mother. "Baby," Ada whispered, "your voice is beautiful. Let them hear it." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she stood, slowly, carefully. And when she opened her mouth, something pure came out, clear, warm, a sound she had never heard from herself before. Everyone in the room went still. Even the children who had teased her for being quiet stared with wide eyes. The music director blinked in surprise. "Child," he said softly, "the Lord put something special in you." From that night forward, Sarah kept her place in the choir. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. People began to speak about her in different ways. Not shy, not slow, not simple. Gifted. That was the word they used. Her singing became her way of speaking to the world, of expressing what she could not say in conversations. In church, when she sang a hymn, she felt something rise inside her, something steady and unbroken, like a well that could not run dry. As she grew older, Sarah began to imagine her future more clearly. She wanted a husband who would treat her gently, a home that felt safe, a family that gathered around a table in the evenings, a life that did not require her to look over her shoulder or keep her guard up in crowded rooms. She did not want grand things. She did not wealth or admiration. She wanted peace. She wanted love. She wanted the kind of steady presence her father offered her mother every day. When she was 15, she saw James for the first time. She had noticed him before, in passing, but on that particular Sunday, something about him stood out. He had dirt on his boots from the pulpwood yard, and a tiredness in his eyes that did not dim his kindness. He stood straight when he greeted her father, and he smiled shyly at her when their eyes met. She looked away quickly, but not because she was afraid, because something inside her opened. Over the next few years, she saw him more often, at church, at the small grocery store where she worked part-time. On days when he came in for flour or coffee, she felt her heart tilt in her chest, as if recognizing something familiar. James was polite, always, soft-spoken, serious. But when he spoke to her, his voice changed subtly, like he was aware of his own awkwardness and trying to hide it. She found him endearing, safe, steady. He made her feel seen, but not exposed, and that mattered more than he could ever know. By the time she turned 19, Sarah understood that her future rested in the shape of the life she built with this quiet, hard-working young man. She dreamed of a house that looked like her childhood home. She imagined her own child learning hymns at Shiloh Baptist. She pictured standing in the yard, sweeping the dirt smooth, her family safe behind her. What she did not know then was how deeply she would hold those dreams, how fiercely she would protect them, or how fragile even the strongest love could be when something sinister entered the edges of her world without her consent. For now, all she carried was hope. It was enough. Her girlhood shaped her. Her shyness had a reason. Her silence had depth. Her voice, when it rose in song, carried pieces of everything she had lived through and everything she longed for. It would be that voice, that gentle spirit, that quiet strength, which would stay with James long after she was gone, echoing through everything he touched, everything he lost, everything he held on to. And in the years ahead, when grief settled over his life like a dark fog, it would be the memory of Sarah's girlhood that anchored him. The morning glories, the hymns, the shy smile, the soft but determined way she stepped through the world. He would remember all of it, because loving her meant knowing her story, and knowing her story meant carrying her voice with him forever. Chapter 7. The Girl at Carter's Grocery. The first time James saw Sarah Williams, he had gone into Carter's grocery for nothing more than a bag of sugar and a spool of thread for his mother. He remembered the day not because the air smelled of rain or because the road was still muddy from the storm the night before, but because something in him shifted the moment he opened the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly as he stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, catching dust motes in its glow. The store was small but full, shelves stocked with flour, canned peaches, coffee tins, and cloth folded neatly in stacks. The faint scent of fresh bread drifted from the back room where Mrs. Carter baked most mornings. James had come in dozens of times over the years, but he had never seen the young woman standing behind the counter before. Sarah looked up as the bell rang. She placed both hands on the wooden counter, her fingers lightly touching the surface. Her apron was crisp and white. Her dark hair was braided neatly and pinned at the back of her head. The soft curve of her cheek caught the light, and her eyes held a calm brightness that startled him. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was warm and steady, shaped by careful diction that made each word sound intentional. He had never heard someone speak quite like that, not around Macon County, not with that mix of softness and clarity. James swallowed. "Morning," he replied. She waited, expression polite but curious. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. He cleared the throat. "Yes, ma'am. Sugar and thread." "What color thread?" His mind blanked for a moment. White," she smiled. "White is a good, safe choice." He felt his face warm. "It is for my mother." "Then she will be pleased. White is useful for everything." She moved with an easy grace as she walked to the far shelf, selected a spool, and returned. When she passed him the sugar and thread, her fingers brushed his lightly. The contact lasted only a moment, but it landed inside him like a quiet spark. "Will that be all?" she asked. He nodded quickly. "Yes, that is it." She placed the items gently in a small brown paper bag. "Mrs. Carter stepped out, so I hope you do not mind me filling in." "No, ma'am, not at all." He gathered the bag. "I have not seen you here before." "I started last week. Mrs. Carter needed help for the summer." He hesitated before asking, "What is your name?" "Sarah," she said. He repeated it quietly. "Sarah." She smiled again, and something in his chest shifted in a way he could not quite name. "Have a good day," she said. "You too." He walked out of the store, feeling as if he had forgotten something important. He glanced inside the bag to make sure the sugar and thread were really there. They were. The whole walk home, the name Sarah circled in his mind, soft like the unfolding of a hymn. For the next few days, he found excuses to go into Carter's grocery more often than he ever had in his life. His mother questioned why the flour disappeared so quickly, or how so many nails were suddenly needed for the yard. Samuel teased him openly. "You going to see that grocery girl again?" Samuel asked one evening, elbowing him as they split wood behind the shed. James scowled. "I am doing errands." Samuel grinned. "Errands with smiling." James shook his head, but the truth sat warm beneath his ribs. He did not know what to call the feeling that drew him back to the store each time. It was not exactly excitement, not exactly nerves. It was something quieter, steadier, like the beginning of a long-held breath. The next Saturday afternoon, he walked into Carter's with a list from his mother and a steady heartbeat he did not want Samuel to notice. The bell chimed, and Sarah looked up. This time her hair was loose at the sides, a few curls framing her face. She was organizing jars of preserves, but she straightened when she saw him. "Hello again," she said. "Afternoon." She tilted her head slightly. "Your mother must do a lot of sewing. That is the third spool of thread this week." He felt heat rise to his ears. "She likes to keep extra." Sarah's smile grew. "Or maybe you like coming in." He froze. Well, she laughed softly, a sound so gentle it made the room feel brighter. "I am teasing," she said. "Mostly." "What do you mean, mostly?" She met his eyes. "You look nervous." "I am not nervous." "You are holding that paper like it might blow away." He looked down. His mother's list was indeed crumpled tightly in his fist. He eased his grip. "What can I get for you?" she asked. He read the list, trying not to stumble. 2 pounds of flour, salt, a jar of molasses. "And thread?" she asked with amusement. "No, ma'am, no thread today." She turned to gather the items. Good to know. As she moved, he noticed the books on the small shelf behind her, titles he had never seen. A worn reader with faded edges, a thin volume of poems, a book with a cover torn at the corner. "You like reading?" he asked. Her eyes lit. "Very much. My mother taught me, and I went to the Rosenwald School." He had heard of the Rosenwald School. It was known for teaching children things beyond the basics: arithmetic, literature, geography. Some said its students came out speaking like they had walked through places they had never seen. "I did not go to school that long," James said. "That is all right," she replied. "Anyone can learn at any age." "I am not good at reading." "Not yet," she said. "Not good yet." The certainty in her tone startled him. She set the flour and salt on the counter and then reached for the molasses. As she placed it down, she looked at him with quiet confidence. "If you want," she said, "I can teach you. After my shift." He blinked. "Teach me?" "Reading. Anything you like." James felt something warm unfold in his chest. "You would do that?" She lifted her chin. "Of course." He studied her for a moment, trying to understand why someone like her would offer something so kind. She had a way about her, a calmness he was not used to. She looked like someone who carried answers inside her, someone unafraid of who she was becoming. "That would mean a lot," he said. "Then we will begin." She slid the bag toward him. "Same time next week?" He nodded. "Yes, same time." He stepped outside, feeling taller, lighter, as if the world had widened around him. The following week, he arrived early. He paced near the oak tree across the road until the last of the customers left the store. Mrs. Carter locked the front door and waved. "You have yourself a good evening, James." "You too, ma'am." Sarah appeared a moment later, a book tucked under her arm. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," he answered. They sat under the oak tree in the shade, where the breeze was soft and the light filtered through in broken patches. She opened the book and pointed to the first line. "Try reading this." He leaned in. The letters looked familiar but stubborn. The words tangled on his tongue. "Take your time," she said. He breathed deeply and tried again. She corrected him gently, encouraged him, guided his finger across the lines. Her patience was unending, her voice warm and steady. As the sun dipped lower, he realized he was smiling without meaning to. "You did well," she said. "I stumbled." "You learned. That is what matters." He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile and promising. "May I walk you home?" he asked. She nodded. They walked slowly down the dusty road, conversation flowing easily. She told him about her mother, her siblings, her choir rehearsals at Shiloh. He told her about the woodyard, the creek, the ways the forest changed with the seasons. When they reached her gate, she stopped and turned to him. "Thank you for the walk." "Thank you for the lesson," he said. She smiled softly. "See you next week, James." He stood watching her go inside, feeling as if something inside him had settled into place, as if this moment had been waiting for them both. In the weeks that followed, their lessons continued. He learned words he had once skipped over. He learned sentences, then paragraphs. Sometimes they read scripture, sometimes poems, sometimes nothing at all, letting conversation carry them. He learned the cadence of her laughter, the tilt of her head when she was thinking, the warmth in her eyes when he succeeded at a difficult passage. He learned that she wanted a family one day, that she believed in kindness even when the world offered little, that she loved the sound of rain on a tin roof. He learned that she saw him not just as a worker or a son or a brother, but as someone worth knowing. And slowly, without realizing it, he began to imagine a future that looked nothing like the one he had once accepted, a future with her. One warm evening near the end of summer, after a lesson where he read nearly half a chapter without a single mistake, she closed the book and looked at him thoughtfully. "James?" she asked. "Yes? Have you ever thought about what you want for your life?" He hesitated. "I want to be a good man, a strong one, someone my family can depend on." She nodded, but her gaze remained searching. "What do you want for yourself?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. No one had ever asked him that before. She waited patiently. After a long quiet, he finally answered, his voice soft. "I want something more than just the work. I do not know what it is yet, but I want it." She smiled. "Then you will find it." "How do you know?" "Because you are brave enough to want it." He inhaled slowly, letting her words settle inside him like seeds. "Sarah, he said. "Do you ever think about your future?" She nodded. "Every day." "What do you see?" She looked away for a moment, then back at him. "I see a family. A home full of peace. A husband who is gentle and strong." Her voice softened. "Someone who listens. Someone who grows with me." James felt his heartbeat rise. She paused. "Someone like you." He looked at her in stunned silence. She reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm and steady. "James," she whispered, "I see you." The world around them softened. The breeze, the shadows, the dying sunlight, all of it faded into something quiet and sacred. He squeezed her hand gently. "I see you too." And in that moment, the future shifted again, settling into a shape he did not fully understand, but felt ready to hold. Chapter 8. A Home Built from Hope. The wedding took place on a warm afternoon in early spring, when the earth smelled fresh and the world felt as though it had been newly washed. Flowers bloomed along the edges of Shiloh Baptist Church, soft bursts of color that looked almost too delicate to touch. Inside, the sanctuary glowed with sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, casting long, warm beams across the wooden pews. James stood nervously near the front, his hands clasped behind him. He wore the best suit he owned, borrowed from a cousin and pressed carefully by his mother. His hair had been trimmed close, and he kept swallowing against the tightness in his throat. Around him, friends and neighbors filled the pews, talking quietly in anticipation. Samuel sat proudly in the front row, wide-eyed with excitement, and Rosie and May whispered to one another in their Sunday dresses. Henry Turner stood beside his son, straight-backed, shoulders squared. He gave James a reassuring nod. "This is a good day," Henry said quietly. James managed a small smile. "Yes, sir." The murmurs in the church softened as the organ began to play. The sound rose gently, filling the room like a held breath. People turned in their seats, gazing toward the door. Then Sarah stepped inside. James had seen her dozens of times, but never like this. She wore a white dress that flowed to her ankles, simple and elegant, with a lace collar her mother had sewn by hand. Her hair was pinned neatly, a few loose strands framing her face. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her mother walked beside her, proud and composed, while her father followed with a steady, measured stride. When Sarah lifted her eyes and saw James, her face brightened with a soft smile that settled him like nothing else ever had. He felt the world narrow to just her. The walk down the aisle felt like a slow unfolding of something meant to be. When she reached him, he took her hand gently, feeling her fingers tremble with excitement. Pastor Collins greeted them with warmth, his voice calm and sure as he blessed their union. Vows were spoken, quiet, sincere promises of love, respect, and partnership. James said his words with steady conviction. Sarah spoke hers with tear-filled eyes that glowed with trust. When Pastor Collins declared them husband and wife, a wave of applause swept through the church. James kissed her softly, a kiss that sealed not just a moment, but a future. The celebration afterward spilled outside, where neighbors gathered in a yard filled with laughter, music, and the smell of fried chicken and fresh biscuits. Children ran and played while the adults talked and congratulated the newly married couple. Sarah stayed close to James, her hand resting in his arm. She seemed to float through the afternoon, glowing with joy. James felt that glow inside himself too, warm and steady. At one point, Lillian pulled Sarah aside for a quiet talk. Henry followed James to the shade of the oak tree. "You did well," Henry said. James nodded. I do not know how to describe it." Henry smiled, a rare sight. "Your life begins in a different way now. You will learn things you did not expect. You will share burdens and joys. It is the hardest and most beautiful work a man can do." "I want to be good to her," James said. "You will be," Henry replied. "I have seen how you look at her, and how she looks at you." They stood together in comfortable silence as the afternoon unfolded. Later, James found Sarah talking with her younger sister, both of them laughing softly. When she saw him, she excused herself and walked over. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Better than all right." She slipped her hand into his. "Me too." Their first home was small, a 2-room house on the edge of the Turner property. Henry and James had built most of it themselves with help from neighbors. The walls still smelled of fresh wood, and the windows let in the morning sun in streams of gold. The front porch was just big enough for 2 chairs and a small table. Sarah planted flowers in the patch of dirt beside the steps, tending them with the same care she gave everything in her life. The first night they slept there, the rain tapped gently against the roof. Sarah rested her head against his chest. "Listen," she whispered. "To what?" "The sound of it. I always loved rain on a roof. It feels like the world is closing its eyes for a moment." He wrapped his arms around her. "I like it too." They lay together in the quiet, the rhythm of the raindrops settling their thoughts, the warmth between them, something he had never known could feel so complete. Life unfolded in simple, beautiful rhythms. Sarah woke early to prepare breakfast, humming softly as she cooked. James left for the woodyard with his father, returning in the evenings tired but content. They ate together every night, talking about their days over cornbread and beans or stew and greens. Sometimes Sarah read to him from her school books, teaching him new words and ideas. He listened with focus, determined to learn. She encouraged him at every step. "Look how far you have come," she said one evening, after he read a full page with only 3 mistakes. "I still stumble," he replied. "But you keep going," she said. "That is what matters." Their evenings often ended on the porch, sharing quiet moments as the sky darkened. Fireflies blinked across the yard like sparks rising from the earth. He held her hand or rested his arm around her shoulders, grateful for the peace they had built. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, she told him in the softest voice. "James," she whispered one morning, her hand trembling slightly, "I think we are going to have a baby." He froze, eyes widening. "A baby?" She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes." An overwhelming mix of joy and fear washed through him. He reached for her, holding her gently. "We will take care of this child," he said. "We will give them everything we can." She rested her head on his chest. "I know." They spent weeks talking about the future. He worked harder than ever, adding shelves to the house, reinforcing the porch, gathering wood for the cold seasons ahead. Sarah sewed small blankets and tiny clothes, her fingers moving with a mixture of anticipation and hope. But hope can be fragile. The day Sarah lost the baby, the world shifted beneath them. She had been feeling unwell for a few days, but insisted it was just fatigue. James came home from the yard to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, pale and trembling. Blood stained the sheets. His heart dropped into his stomach. "Sarah?" he whispered, rushing to her. She looked at him with eyes full of fear. "Something is wrong." He lifted her carefully, carried her to the wagon, and hurried to find the nearest doctor. The ride felt endless. Every bump in the road made him wince, made him whisper prayers under his breath. The doctor examined her with a grave expression. He spoke softly, but the words landed in James's ears with crushing weight. "I am sorry," the doctor said. Sarah wept quietly. James held her hand, unable to find words. He felt helpless, broken, angry at himself for not recognizing how sick she had been, angry at the world for letting this happen. That night, he sat beside her on the bed long after she fell asleep, staring into the dim light. His heart ached with a pain he had never known. Losing the child felt like losing a piece of their future, a piece they had trusted God to protect. Sarah barely ate for days. She cried quietly when she thought he was not looking. He tried to be strong for her, but he too felt the heaviness of grief settling into the corners of their home. One evening, as she lay curled on the bed, she whispered, "I am sorry, James." He turned to her, taken aback. "Sorry? Why would you say that?" I could not keep the baby." He knelt beside her and took her hands. "Sarah, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. We will get through this together." She held his gaze, tears shining in her eyes. "Together?" "Always," he said. "You and me." She breathed out softly. Together forever. In the months that followed, they held on to each other more tightly than before. The grief did not vanish, but it softened around the edges. Sarah found comfort in choir practice, her voice steady even when her heart felt fragile. James found solace in work, losing himself in the steady rhythm of the axe and the smell of fresh-cut wood. Slowly, the house filled with laughter again. Slowly, hope returned. And one warm autumn afternoon, when the leaves had begun to turn gold, Sarah took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "James," she whispered, I think it happened again." He stared at her, breath trembling. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her eyes glowing with cautious joy. "Yes, I am sure." This time they were careful, gentle, hopeful, but watchful. Sarah rested more. James checked on her constantly, doing double the work to keep her off her feet. When their son was born the following spring, strong and healthy, with a loud cry that filled their small home, James held him in his arms and whispered, "Isaac Turner, welcome to the world." Sarah smiled through tears. "He looks like you." James shook his head. "He looks like us." They lay together that night, their baby sleeping in a handmade cradle, the soft glow of lamplight warming the room. "You and me," James whispered. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "Together forever." In the quiet of their first night as a family, those words felt like a blessing, a promise sealed in the place where love and resilience meet, a promise that would carry them through years they could not yet imagine, years of joy, years of hardship, years of trials none of them were prepared for. But for now, the world was gentle, the nights were peaceful, and their home was full. Chapter 9. The First Visit. James was 26 when the government first came calling, though the men who stepped onto his land that day were not dressed in a way that suggested anything as grand as the United States. Their car, a dark sedan, coated in dust from the long drive down the country road, came rolling across the yard shortly after sunrise. The engine sputtered, then fell silent. Birds scattered from the trees. James had been chopping wood behind the house, stacking split logs beside the shed, when he heard the car door close. He set the axe aside and wiped sweat from his brow. The morning was already warm, and the air carried the thick scent of summer grass. Two men stood near the car, one older with thinning hair, the other tall and younger with polished shoes that did not belong anywhere near the woods. Their clothes were clean and pressed, far too neat for men who intended to stay long in Macon County. The shorter man stepped forward and greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good morning," he said. "Are you James?" James nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir." "I am Dr. Stevens," the man said. "This is Dr. Randall." The taller man offered a quick nod. Neither held out a hand in greeting. James straightened, uncertain. "What brings you here?" "We are visiting families in the county," Dr. Stevens said, "checking on the health of the men in the area. We were told you are a hard worker, someone who provides for his home." James felt a small flicker of pride at the words, but something inside him tensed. Compliments from strangers rarely came without expectation. "My health is fine," James said. "Of course," Dr. Stevens replied. "You look strong, exactly the kind of man we are focused on. Healthy men who want to stay healthy." He stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. James noticed the faint scent of cologne, sharp and unfamiliar. "We will be holding examinations in the county over the next few weeks," the doctor continued. "Simple ones, a check on the blood, a check on general condition. Quick and easy, no charge." "No charge?" James said slowly. "None at all," Dr. Stevens said. "This is a government-supported program, something meant to help communities like yours." Something like unease stirred inside James. He did not know much about government programs, but he knew nothing came without reason. Before he could speak again, Sarah stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She had been preparing breakfast and carried the faint smell of biscuits and warm butter. "James?" she called gently. He turned toward her. "It is all right," he said. "Just visitors." Sarah studied the men from the porch. Her expression did not soften. Dr. Stevens looked up at her. "Good morning, ma'am." "Morning," she replied, her voice steady but cautious. "We were just telling your husband about a medical program," Dr. Stevens said. "One he may be eligible for. It could benefit your family." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "My husband is healthy," she said, "and we do not need strangers on our land to tell us otherwise." A faint smile tugged at the corner of the doctor's mouth, though it did not reach his eyes. "Of course, many families feel that way initially, but you would be surprised how many men discover health concerns they were unaware of." James felt Sarah's hand slip into his. "We will think on it," James said. Dr. Stevens hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Very well. We will be in the county for some time. You may visit our site at Shiloh Baptist Church whenever you are ready." James stiffened slightly. "Shiloh?" "Yes," Dr. Stevens replied pleasantly. "A convenient central location. The pastor has welcomed the effort." Pastor Collins? James wondered. It was unlike the pastor to agree to anything without caution. But the doctors had said the name with certainty. The men returned to their car. Dr. Stevens paused with his hand on the door. "Remember," he said, "good health is a gift, but it must be checked on, especially for hard-working men." He climbed into the sedan. The engine rumbled to life, and the car rolled back down the road, disappearing behind a bend of trees. Silence settled between James and Sarah. She looked at him carefully. "I did not like them." James exhaled slowly. "Neither did I." The next Sunday, Shiloh Baptist was unusually full. People whispered in the pews before service began, leaning toward one another with questions that seemed to ripple across the sanctuary. When Pastor Collins stepped behind the pulpit, his expression was calm, but there was tension in the corners of his mouth. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to address something many of you have been hearing about." The room fell silent. "The doctors who visited the county this week approached me regarding examinations they plan to offer," he continued. "I have allowed the church to be used as a temporary location. They assured me it would be for the good of the community." Murmurs rose at once. Sarah leaned toward James. "Assured him?" she whispered. "Or persuaded him?" James did not answer. "However," Pastor Collins said, raising his voice, "I urge everyone to be cautious. Ask questions. Do not agree to anything you do not understand. God gives wisdom for a reason." The congregation nodded, uneasy. As service went on, James tried to focus on the hymns as scripture, but his thoughts kept drifting. The doctors, their polished shoes, the unnatural calm in their voices, the way they had looked at his home as though assessing something he could not see. After service, he greeted neighbors on the church steps. Many were talking about the rumored examinations. "You going to go?" one man asked him. "I do not know yet," James replied. "You should," another said. "Does not hurt to be checked." James studied their faces. Some were eager, some uncertain. Some simply wanted answers they did not yet know how to ask. Then he saw his father standing near the end of the walkway, speaking to a few older men. Henry's expression was tight. James approached. "Daddy?" Henry turned. "You hear about this foolishness?" "They came by the house," James said. Henry snorted. "Doctors do not drive miles down dirt roads unless they want something." One of the older men nodded. "They say it is to help us, but help from strangers is a thing I question." Henry looked at his son. "Stay clear of them for now. Let others go first if they want, but you keep your eyes open." James nodded. "Yes, sir." But the words did not settle him. A few evenings later, after supper, James walked alone to the creek. The sky was turning purple, the cicadas humming in the warm air. He sat on the bank and skimmed stones across the surface. Each one skipped a few times before sinking. He thought of the doctors. He thought of their presence in the county, of the whispers they stirred. He thought of his father's warning and Pastor Collins's caution. And he thought of Sarah. She appeared beside him a few minutes later, settling gracefully on the grass. "You left without saying anything," she said. "I needed to think." She nodded. "I know." He glanced at her. Do you think I should go to their examination? I think, she said gently, that you should trust your instincts. They have kept you safe for a long time. I cannot explain it. Something feels wrong. It does, she whispered. But you are a man who carries responsibility for this family. Only you can decide. He brushed his thumb across her hand. I want to protect you and Isaac. You already do, she said. Her voice was soft, full of quiet faith. He lowered his head. I keep thinking of the baby we lost, he said. What if there is something wrong with me? Something I do not know? Sarah stayed still. A long moment passed before she answered. If there is something wrong, she said, we face it together, but not with strangers who walk onto our land and pretend to know us. He lifted his head slowly. Together, he said. Together, she repeated. They sat in silence, listening to the creek's gentle flow, neither of them realizing how heavily these choices would one day rest on their shoulders. A week later, Nurse Whitford arrived in the county. Unlike the doctors, she did not come in a polished car or speak with practiced detachment. She walked with a steady, familiar presence through town and greeted people by name. She visited homes with a clipboard tucked under her arm and a warm smile that disarmed even the most cautious residents. When she knocked on the Turner door, Sarah answered. Mrs. Turner, Evelyn said warmly, I am Nurse Whitford. I wanted to check on your family. Sarah stepped slightly aside. Come in. James appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands. He had not expected another visitor. Mr. Turner, she said with a bright smile, we have heard you are one of the men we should be checking on. James stiffened, but her voice held none of the smooth coldness of the doctor's. She felt familiar somehow, like someone from the church family. Just a routine check, she said, for the good of the community. Sarah looked at James, waiting for him to respond. He forced a polite nod. We are listening. Evelyn opened her clipboard. The doctors will be at Shiloh this weekend. It will be a simple visit. You will be given a checkup, blood work, a small payment for your time. That is all. James exchanged a glance with Sarah. Why me? He asked. Because you are young and strong, she said. You represent the future health of the county. Her words were simple, said without pressure, and yet something about the way she said them wrapped around him like a careful thread. I hope to see you there, she added gently. A man like you could help others feel more comfortable going. Sarah's hand touched James's back ever so slightly. Nurse Whitford smiled again and stepped outside. Have a blessed evening. As she walked down the path, James watched her go. She seems kind, Sarah said. She does, James replied. But despite the warmth in Evelyn's voice, something inside him still felt unsettled. Kindness could be real, but it could also be a very effective door, and he did not yet know which one he had opened. Chapter 10. The Years of Hope. The best days at Shiloh Baptist did not start in the sanctuary. They started in the yard. By mid-morning, the ground around the small white church was already alive. Women moved between tables with pans wrapped in clean dish towels. Men carried wooden benches out from the fellowship hall. Children chased one another under the pines, their laughter mixing with the low murmur of grown folks greeting each other after another long week. James stood near the back of the yard, a folding table balanced in his hands, Isaac at his side trying to help by holding the other end. You are not lifting anything, James said, smiling down at him. I am lifting, Isaac insisted, just a little. James chuckled and shifted some of the weight to make room for the boy's pride. All right then, we will say you carried half. They set the table down near the others. Already the simple boards were turning into a feast. A pan of fried chicken rested beside a big bowl of potato salad. There were 2 skillets of cornbread, edges crisp and golden. A pot of collard greens sent up a rich, smoky steam that carried the scent of ham hock and fatback through the air. Someone lifted the lid on a pot of black-eyed peas, stirred them slowly, then put the lid back with a satisfied nod. On the far end of the table, under a piece of clean cloth, sat 3 pies: sweet potato, apple, and one pale pie that Sarah had called vinegar pie, the recipe handed down from her mother. Sugar cost money, lemons cost more, but vinegar and a careful hand could mimic something bright and sharp enough to feel special. James looked over the spread and shook his head with quiet admiration. "Folks know how to make something out of little," he said. Sarah was coming toward him across the yard, a tray of fried chicken in her hands, wrapped tight with a towel to keep the warmth in. She had tied her hair back with a faded blue ribbon. The white of her blouse glowed in the sun. Isaac ran to her and reached for the tray. "I can help, Mama." "You can help by not eating the first piece," she said, smiling. "I was not going to," he protested. She raised an eyebrow, and he grinned, knowing he had been caught before he even tried. James watched them for a moment, the sight settling deep in his chest. The heat, the food, the easy movement of people who knew one another's stories, all of it made a kind of quiet music inside him. "Put it right here," James said, taking the tray from Sarah and setting it between the potato salad and a big bowl of butter beans, "so people know who to thank when their fingers get greasy." Sarah laughed. "They will thank the chicken, not me." "They will thank both," he replied. "You turned that bird into something holy." She shook her head and brushed her hand lightly against his arm. It was a small touch, quick and familiar, but it sent a warm line through him. Under the shade of one of the bigger pines, a group of older men had gathered, leaning on canes or resting their hands on the backs of folding chairs. Someone had already set up a galvanized tub filled with ice and bottles of soda for the children, and a separate jug of sweet tea sweating in the heat. Beside it, on the grass, sat a smaller, plainer jug that no one announced out loud. Now and then, one of the men lifted it and poured a little clear liquid into a tin cup, the quick movement shielded from view by a broad back or a slow chuckle. White lightning did not need an introduction. The air was dotted with the sounds of tuning instruments, a guitar string being tightened and plucked, a harmonica tested with a soft trial run. Somewhere behind the church, someone practiced a line of a hymn, voice rising and falling, warming up like the sky before rain. Inside, the sanctuary would later fill with clapping hands and polished shoes on old wooden floors. For now, the yard was church enough. Reverend Miles walked through the crowd with his Bible tucked under his arm, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He stopped every few steps to ask about a mother's health, a son's job, a cousin up in Birmingham. He lingered with the older women, who gave him updates on their knees and their grandchildren and the state of their gardens. "James," he called when he neared the tables, "you bring anything besides that long frame of yours and that handsome boy?" "I brought my appetite, Reverend," James said, "and my tithe, so I can eat with a clear conscience." Several of the nearby men laughed. "And I brought the vinegar pie," Sarah called. Reverend Miles turned toward her, his eyes brightening. Now that is the kind of contribution a man remembers in his evening prayer. "Sit and let somebody fix you a plate," Sarah said. "In due time," he replied. "First, I must make sure the Lord knows I saw how much food is out here. He might want to bless it twice." As the day settled into itself, the choir gathered near the front steps. Sarah stood with the other women, her songbook folded open in her hands. The children quieted at the first familiar chords. Conversation faded to a murmur as the first hymn rose. "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah," the choir began, voices blending in a harmony that had been built over years of shared grief and shared joy. Sarah's alto slipped into the sound, steady and sure, a line that held firm under the brighter notes around her. James stood with the others, hat in hand, Isaac pressed against his side. He listened to his wife's voice travel across the yard, felt it move through him like something both soft and strong. He caught sight of her face as she sang, eyes closed for a verse, open the next, focused on something more than the words. She looks at peace, he thought. When the hymn ended, Reverend Miles stepped forward onto the bottom church step. "Let us give thanks," he said, "for food, for breath, for one more day under the Lord's hand and not under the hand of any man who means us harm." There was a low murmur of assent around the yard. He bowed his head. The crowd followed. His prayer was simple, born of habit and heart rather than show. He thanked God for the farmers and the pulpwood workers and the women who rose before sunup to cook. He thanked God for children's feet in the dust and for the shoulders of men still strong enough to carry loads. He did not ask for wealth. He asked for enough. "Let there be enough," he said quietly. "Enough food, enough strength, enough mercy, enough joy to hold us when sorrow comes again." James felt those words settle inside him. He did not think about why the Reverend said, "when sorrow comes," and not "if." Life had already taught them all that sorrow always came back. For now, the sky was blue and the tables were full, and his son's hand was small and warm in his own. After the prayer, they opened the tables. People moved forward in loose lines, the order shaped more by courtesy than rules. Older folks went first, then women balancing babies, then everyone else. Plates filled quickly: chicken, greens, peas, cornbread, potatoes, scoops of rice catching the juices of slow-cooked beans. Sarah fixed a plate for Isaac, piling it higher than he expected. "I cannot eat all this," he protested. "You can try," she said, "and if you do not, your daddy will finish it for you." "I will take care of anything that is left," James said, reaching for a piece of chicken from his own plate. "I do not like to see the Lord's blessing go to waste." They found a spot on the grass under a tree and sat together, plates balanced on their laps. The breeze carried bits of conversation to them from every side. Talk of crops, talk of jobs, talk of a boy who had gone up north last year looking for work in a factory. "Would you ever go north, Daddy?" Isaac asked between bites. James chewed slowly before he answered. "Maybe to visit," he said, "but my roots are here. This soil knows my name." "And your knees," Sarah added, "from all that bending." He smiled at her. "My knees are not that old." "They are older than mine," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You saying I married a young girl who did not know any better?" "No," she said, her voice softening. "I am saying I married a man who makes hard places feel safe. Does not matter how old his knees are." He looked at her a moment longer, then glanced away, the warmth in her words almost too much to meet head-on. Near the edge of the yard, someone started up a blues lick on a guitar, soft at first, almost like they were testing whether it would be allowed. A few of the older women shot glances in that direction. "This is a church gathering," one of them said, folding her arms. "It is a yard gathering," another replied. "After we done prayed and ate, the Lord does not mind if our feet remember they got joints." The guitarist took that as permission and leaned into the tune a little more. A harmonica slid in beside it, thin and bright. A few of the younger couples began to sway, small steps in the dust, shoulders touching, laughter slipping between them. Sarah watched with a half-smile. "You want to dance?" James asked, teasing. "With these plates in our laps?" she replied. "You trying to waste food now?" "We can finish eating first," he said. "Then maybe I will show you I remember how to keep a rhythm." "You keep it better with an axe than with your feet." He chuckled. "That may be true." They ate until the plates were mostly clean. Isaac left a few bites of greens and some rice. James finished them without comment, just as he said he would. As the afternoon stretched on, the children started games near the far fence line. Someone brought out a ball. Someone else organized a small race. Isaac joined without hesitation, his legs flying down the rough stretch of ground, bare feet kicking up dust. "Look at him run," Sarah said. "That boy got more speed than I ever did," James replied. "If I can keep him in school, he might outrun all of this." "All of what?" she asked. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "The hard parts," he said finally. "The way a man can work himself into the ground and still feel like he is sinking. I want him to have something steady to stand on." She nodded. "We will give it to him. Between your hands and my books, we will build him something better." "You and me," he said quietly. "Together forever," she answered, the words in easy, familiar rhythm now. From somewhere near the tables, a shout of approval rose as someone took a sip of something stronger than tea. Laughter followed. The guitar played on. Choir members started another song. This one closer to a gospel number, but with a hint of swing in the way the rhythm moved. As the sun inched toward the far trees, the light softened, turning everything gold at the edges. Shadows lengthened across the churchyard. Someone started wrapping leftovers. Pans were covered. Dishes were claimed. Children were called back to their parents with gentle threats about baths and early bedtimes. James helped fold the tables back down, his muscles pleasantly tired. The sounds of the day settled into a quieter hum. Isaac was drowsy by the time they climbed into the wagon, his head resting against Sarah's shoulder. She stroked his hair, humming a tune she had sung in the choir earlier. James took the reins and looked back at the small church, its white paint glowing faintly in the last of the light. Days like this, he thought, were what a man worked for. Not riches, not titles, just enough food on the table, enough music in the air, enough laughter around him to make the hard parts bearable. He had no way of knowing that men in offices far away had already begun to speak about his community in other terms. Subjects, samples, cases, data. He did not know that one day the trust and warmth that filled this yard would be used against them. All he knew was the smell of fried chicken and greens lingering on his clothes, the sound of Sarah's voice in his ear, the gentle weight of his sleeping son against her side, and the feeling that for this one moment, under this fading sky, everything that mattered most was right there with him, safe and whole. He clucked softly to the mule and turned toward home, the church growing smaller behind them as the road reached out ahead. Chapter 11. Whispers in the County. The first week after Nurse Whitford's visit felt strangely heavy, as though the county itself was holding its breath. Word spread quickly about the examinations at Shiloh Baptist. Men who rarely visited one another's homes now lingered in yards at dusk, leaning against fence posts or porch rails, trading stories of sickness they feared but never named aloud. James noticed it everywhere he went. In the woodyard with his father, in the general store, even on Sunday mornings as families settled into their pews. The air had shifted. Something was coming, though no one could yet say what it was. One warm evening, after a long day in the yard, James walked the short distance to his parents' house for supper. Sarah and Isaac joined him, Isaac tugging eagerly on his father's hand. The smell of chicken frying drifted through the open window. Lillian Turner greeted them with a smile full of warmth, though her eyes carried the tired softness James had grown familiar with over the years. Come in," she said, ushering them inside. "Supper is almost ready." Rosie and May darted around the table, setting plates, while Samuel stirred a pot on the stove. Henry sat in his chair sharpening a blade with long, slow strokes, the movement steady and practiced. "Daddy," James said, nodding in greeting. Henry looked up. "Good to see you all." They sat together, hands joined in prayer, thanking God for the meal, for family, for another day of strength. The moment felt peaceful, but James noticed tension brewing beneath the surface. Halfway through the meal, Samuel set down his fork. "You hear that some of the men already went?" he asked. "To the examinations?" Henry's jaw tightened. "Which men?" "Clem Howard, Levi Sims, and old Mr. Thompson." Henry snorted. "Old Mr. Thompson will walk into any room if you promise him $1. "They are paying the men?" Rosie asked, eyes wide. "Paying enough to get attention," Samuel answered. $2 just to show up." Henry's face hardened. $2 to stick you with something. Rosie shuddered. "I do not want nobody sticking me with nothing." "No one will," Lillian said firmly. "We mind our business and keep our family close." James shifted in his seat. "Sarah and I have been talking about it. Nurse Whitford came by the house." Lillian's spoon clattered softly against her bowl. "What did she want?" "To tell us about the examinations," James said. Sarah interlaced her fingers with Isaac's as she spoke. "She seemed kind, but something felt wrong," James finished. Henry set the knife on the table. "You listen to that feeling." "I am trying," James said. Henry leaned forward, eyes steady. "Son, you are a grown man now. You got a wife, a child. You cannot be walking into things just because someone says it is for your good. I know. Good, Henry said, because I have lived long enough to know that when people outside this county start showing interest in us, it usually ends with us losing more than we gain. Silence filled the room. Then Lillian spoke in a softer tone. James, is there something you are worried about? Something you think the doctors might find? James hesitated. Sarah looked at him gently, waiting. He swallowed. Sometimes I feel tired, more than usual. I thought it was the work, but I do not know. Lillian reached across the table and touched his hand. Work will wear any man down. That is why God gave us rest. Do not let fear make choices for you. Samuel nodded. If something was wrong with you, we would have seen it. James looked at his family one by one. Their faith in him was steady, but the uncertainty inside him felt deeper than they knew. After supper, he walked outside to the porch with his father. The night was warm. Crickets hummed in the grass. Henry lit his pipe, took a slow draw, and exhaled. Tell me what is really on your mind, Henry said. James leaned against the porch rail. I keep thinking, what if I could get a checkup for free, just to know, just to be safe? Safe from what? Henry asked. James shook his head. I do not know. Maybe that is the problem. Henry tapped ash into a small tin. You want to know why I did not go? James nodded. Because I have lived long enough to understand that fear is a terrible teacher, Henry said. It will take you places you never needed to go. James looked out into the dark. I just want to protect Sarah and Isaac. Then trust the people who love you, Henry said, not strangers in shiny shoes. James breathed out slowly. I hear you. Henry rested a hand on his shoulder. I want you to remember something. Strength does not come from letting someone poke and prod at you. It comes from knowing when to say no. James nodded quietly. But the question continued circling inside him. What if something really was wrong? 2 days later, while heading into town for milk, James passed the old Miller farm and saw a group of men gathered near the fence. He slowed his wagon and recognized several of them. Levi Sims, Tommy Green, a few younger men he had worked with at the yard. You hear? Tommy called out as James approached. Clem went to the church yesterday. James halted the wagon. What happened? Levi leaned against the fence. They poked his arm, took some of his blood, and gave him a paper to sign. Said they will be following up. Tommy added, they gave him $1 and a hot meal. Clem said it was not so bad. $1, James repeated. Levi nodded. Easy money if you ask me. Tommy grinned. You thinking about going? Before James could answer, Levi lowered his voice. Because I will tell you something, Turner. There are worse things than a checkup. Men get hurt working in the fields. Men get sick and do not know why. Something free for once? Might be worth it. James's stomach tightened. I do not trust it, another man said. Willie Harper, leaning against the post. Doctors want something. They always do. Levi rolled his eyes. You always seeing ghosts. Willie stared him down. Ghosts show up for a reason. James listened quietly as the men argued. Some said the government finally cared for the county. Others said the government never had and never would. You going, Turner? Levi asked again. James hesitated. I said I would think about it. Well, think quick, Tommy said. They will not be here forever. James flicked the reins and moved on, feeling the weight of every word settle inside him. That night at home, as Sarah washed dishes and Isaac stacked his small wooden blocks near the fireplace, James sat in his chair, staring at his hands. Sarah watched him from the kitchen doorway. You are quiet, she said. He looked up slowly. I saw the men today. Many are going. I know, she said gently. I heard the women talking at the well this afternoon. What did they say? That some of the men feel safer after going. Others think it is trouble. James rubbed his forehead. I do not know what to do. Sarah stepped toward him, wiping her hands on a cloth. She knelt beside his chair and set her hand over his. "James," she said softly, "listen to me. You have always trusted your heart. That is what makes you the man you are." He nodded slowly. "But," she continued, "I also know you carry worry inside you. You do not always say it, but I see it." He breathed out, "I want to be sure I am healthy. For you. For Isaac. I know. I do not want to miss something that could hurt us later." Sarah rested her head against his knee. "Then let us pray on it." They bowed their heads. Her voice rose quietly, steady and warm. "Lord, guide us. Give James clarity. Give him peace. Help us choose the path that keeps our family safe." James whispered his own silent words into the space between them. When the prayer ended, she looked up. "We will decide together." "Together," he repeated. He picked up her hand and kissed it softly. Across the room, Isaac clapped his blocks into a tall stack and smiled proudly, unaware of the seeds being planted around him, seeds that would one day grow into a story none of them could imagine. 2 mornings later, James woke with an ache behind his eyes, a dull pressure. Not unbearable, but enough to make him pause. He sat at the edge of the bed, pressing his fingers lightly to his temples. "You all right?" Sarah asked sleepily. "Yes," he said quickly, "just a headache." She watched him closely, her brow creasing. "You work too hard." He forced a small smile. "I am fine." But the headache stayed with him most of the day, not sharp, but persistent. When he bent to lift a heavy log, the world dimmed for a second. He blinked until the light returned. He shook his head and pushed the worry aside. That evening, as he walked Isaac to bed, the boy lifted his arms. "Carry me, Daddy." James smiled and scooped him up. But as he lifted him, a brief wave of dizziness passed through him. He tightened his hold, steadying himself. "Daddy?" Isaac asked. James forced a calm voice. "I am all right, little man." He tucked his son into bed, kissed his forehead, and stood quietly in the doorway. Sarah appeared beside him. "You felt something," she whispered. He hesitated. "Just a moment, nothing more." Her eyes filled with worry. "James!" "I am all right." He kissed her cheek and walked outside into the night, needing air. The stars shimmered above him, distant and unmoving. He leaned against the porch railing and tried to steady his breath. He thought of the ache, the dimming, the growing pressure inside him. Fear crept in. He whispered into the darkness, "Lord, what if something is wrong?" His voice trembled. A breeze passed through the trees, cool and soft. Behind him, Sarah stood silently in the doorway, watching the man she loved fight a battle she could not yet name. By the end of the week, the county buzzed with urgency. More men had gone to the examinations. More had returned with stories that seemed harmless enough. "They draw your blood and give you a sandwich." "They say I got something, but I cannot pronounce it." "They say they will come by the house for follow-ups." It is nothing. It is something. It depended entirely on who spoke. James felt the pressure tighten around him. Everywhere he went, someone asked whether he had gone yet, whether he was planning to, whether he was afraid. He realized something important. Fear was becoming a sort of invitation, and the men who answered it first were shifting the rest toward a decision. At the end of that week, Nurse Whitford returned. She knocked on the Turner door with her same calm smile and familiar warmth. "James," she said gently, "we would love to see you at Shiloh tomorrow. It will only take a few minutes. We want to take good care of you." Sarah looked at her with searching eyes. Evelyn added quietly, "Men your age are our priority. We want to catch things early." James felt something inside him tighten. "Will you come?" she asked softly. He looked at Sarah. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Yes," James said. Nurse Whitford smiled with relief. "We will be expecting you." And when she left, The door closed with a quiet click that felt like the turning of a key. The choice was made, but James did not yet understand what he had opened.